From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Chris Payne. It's Wednesday, July 5. The Ashes. It's the most venerated contest in cricket, and it's descended into farce after a moment on the field led to questions about the game's spirit and the intervention of two Prime Ministers.
That's another short ball. Oh, now this is going to be interesting. Jonny Bairstow's walked out of his crease here. This could well be out.
If you're a casual observer of the sport, you'd be forgiven for wondering how the legal stumping of a batsman led to the abuse of players and a borderline diplomatic incident.
Usman Khawaja confronting a member of the Marylebone Cricket Club who hurled vile abuse. In the stairwell, the rest of the Australian team subjected to the same treatment.
But when you have two sports-mad countries in Australia and England, with their inbuilt rivalry and more than a century of fierce contest, it really doesn't take much kindling to spark a firestorm. So, how has a dismissal on the final day of the second test, upheld by the umpires and the rules of the game, driven an even deeper divide between players, coaches, fans, and yes, even Prime Ministers? To walk us through all the drama, we're joined by the chief reporter for The Age, Chip Legrand. Chip, now we've both watched plenty of cricket for a long time. We've seen controversies and high drama, particularly between Australia and England. This one feels pretty ugly though. Can you tell us exactly what happened at Lord's?
Well, so the key moment, this is on the fifth day of the second test at Lord's, and it's fairly evenly placed where England needed a further 178 runs to win the second test and to level the series. They had 5 wickets in hand, and at the end of an over, the ball's gone through to the keeper, alexcarey. Carey had previously noticed that the batsman, Jonny Bairstow, had a habit of sort of wandering out of his crease after a delivery.
Jonny Bairstow's walked out of his crease here. This could well be out.
At a crucial point on the final day, Jonny Bairstow adjudged on field and upstairs to be run out.
Alexcarey's just thrown the ball at the stumps and hit them.
Quick thinking by Australian wicketkeeper alexcarey, finding Bairstow short of his ground, with the ball deemed live.
Yep, no great surprise.
So as soon as he's gloved the ball, he's had a shy at the stumps. It's hit the wickets as Bairstow has wandered out of his crease. The Australians have appealed and the umpires have given it out, and all hell's broken loose.
Okay, so if I'm looking at newspapers in England saying Australians are cheats, cheat, this is illegal though, isn't it? Like it's a fair dismissal.
Well, yeah, it's out. The laws of cricket around this are pretty clear. The key thing is whether or not the ball's live or it's dead. And the law that covers this area says that, and I'll quote from it, it says the ball shall be considered to be dead when it is clear to the bowler's end umpire that the fielding side and both batters at the wicket have ceased to regard it as in play. So in other words, when both teams basically agree that the ball's dead, the umpire then decides and the ball's dead. Until then, a player, if he's standing outside his crease, can get run out.
So I guess the key tension around this has been the discussion of whether or not this was in the spirit of cricket, the so-called spirit of cricket, which I want to ask you about. It's often invoked when one side perceives an injustice, not illegal, but maybe not sporting. What's it all about, and is its importance overstated?
Well, this is where it's interesting this happened at Lord's because, of course, Lord's and the Marylebone Cricket Club, that's the cricket club that basically decided the laws of the game, and it's the self-appointed guardian of both the laws and the spirit of the game. And really, the kind of notions that are evoked, they're kind of exactly what you'd expect in terms of just people playing good sportsmanship. So it's respect. It's respect for your opponents, respect for your teammates, respect for the captains, respect for the authority of the umpires. One of the key tenets of it is to accept the umpire's decision. So this is where the whole notion of who's playing within the spirit is kind of open to interpretation, because the one thing that the English haven't done here is accept the umpire's decision on Jonny Bairstow.
Some of the criticism's been levelled at Pat Cummins, the captain, and whether or not he should have called him back in the spirit. Now, since taking over as captain, he's been regarded as one of the good guys of the sport. Do you think this in any way tarnishes that reputation?
Look, I don't think it does. It's not so much about Pat Cummins, but also just the Australian team. So obviously, if we go back to the real definitive event in the life of the Australian team in recent history was what happened in Cape Town, where they were caught manipulating the ball with a piece of sandpaper, so cheating, absolutely against the rules of the game, to try to get an advantage in a test match against South Africa. Since then, there's been an overhaul, not just of the personnel of the team, in terms of having two captains since, but players have come in and out, and really a bit of a cultural overhaul to the team. And so, part of what, if you think back to Cape Town, part of that was really this kind of snarling, uber-aggressive persona of the Australian cricket team. And I really don't think that the team under Pat Cummins has that. Cummins certainly doesn't have that as a captain, or even indeed as a fast bowler, despite how difficult he'd be to face on a seaming track. I mean, he's very fast, he's a very good bowler, but he's not your chest out, macho alpha figure in charge of that kind of a team. So I think that type of criticism is placed, and that's why I think in a lot of ways this particular episode, even though, we've had both prime ministers join and so forth, I don't really think it's got the same venom in it as previous ones have.
So that's chapter 1, if you like, what happened on the field. But chapter 2 is what happened off it, specifically when the Australian players left for lunch. They walked through the long room at Lord's. I feel that this could be a whole podcast on its own, but what is the long room? Who is in it? Why is it unique? And what happened there?
Yeah, so the long room is this room that runs inside the members' pavilion at Lord's. They call it the long room because it's about 28 metres long, it's about 8 metres wide, these huge decorative ceilings, kind of a couple of big roaring fireplaces in the winter. On the walls, you've got these portraits of great figures in the history of cricket. But the thing that makes that room particular is that when players leave the field, they walk through the long room. So they walk amongst the MCC members to go through to the dressing room, or to go, in this case, to the dining room to have their lunch. And when the Australians left the field on that last day in Lord's and they entered the long room, the MCC members who were in there absolutely gave it to them. It was like they were walking through the old Bay 13. It was full on. And it was so out of character for what Lord's is supposed to be about, but certainly the MCC is this, self-appointed guardians of the spirit of the game. And it was actually pretty shameful. They were calling the Australians cheats. They were heckling them. They were booing them. It really got quite heated. Some of it seemed to be directed particularly at Usman Khawaja, who's, probably the most sort of mild-mannered player on the whole Australian team. And it was a very ugly scene. And it was interesting that John Major, if we talk about prime ministers, so former Prime Minister John Major, he was asked about this, and he was quite sanguine about the whole run-out situation. But he said the real shameful part of this episode was what happened in the long room. He was disgusted at the scenes there, and a lot of Brits have been.
If you could just unpack a little bit for our listeners the sort of sense of irony here, that there's this debate about the spirit of cricket, and then in the long room, the MCC are perhaps acting against the spirit, which they're protesting the Australians didn't act in. There's a broader context to this, isn't there? And you wrote about this report that didn't reflect too well on English cricket.
Well, I mentioned John Major, and he actually wrote the foreword to this report. It was a report by the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, and that was only published last month. Now, that report, it was about 2 years in the making. It came out of the Black Lives Matter movement. It really got fueled by some testimony that was provided to the UK Parliament about racism, particularly at the Yorkshire Cricket Club. And what the report found was this elitist and exclusionary culture within English and Welsh cricket. I'll just read part of it because I think it's quite important when we're looking at what happened here at Lords, where it says that this culture is, in part, enforced through the dominance of private school networks within cricket's talent pathway, together with sexist, racist, and other discriminatory practices and policies that lead to discriminatory outcomes across the game. So this inquiry heard, examples of extensive evidence of racism and sexism. It says it's our assessment that the extent, frequency, and seriousness of some of the behaviours described to us reveal a culture in which overt discrimination often goes without serious challenge. It can lead to misogynistic and homophobic and ableist comments at cricket clubs and a laddish drinking culture, and on it goes, right? So it doesn't paint a very good picture of what's at the heart of English cricket. And the reason it's doing that is it's trying to figure out why, for a lot of people growing up in modern England, cricket doesn't feel like a game that's open to them. So this sense that it's the domain of these, private school elites, and it's not embracing all facets of English society. And the MCC, where it's got about 18,000 members, about 200 of whom are women. It only started admitting women in 1999. And in fact, before that, the Queen of England was the only woman who was allowed in the long room. So it's this very kind of exclusive domain, and they're sitting there with their, what they call their egg and bacon blazers, their striped blazers. They may as well have straw hats on. I mean, for the past, 200 years, the only regular school matches there has been between Eton and Harrow. It's that kind of a place. And I think it was fascinating. If you were the authors of that report, they spent 2 years. Well, they might have just spent 5 minutes in the long room that day, and it could have told them everything they need to know about the cultural problems in English cricket.
It's all pretty unusual. You've got UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak obviously taking England's side. You've got Albo tweeting taking our side. It all seems a bit of fun. But we've got to remember there's actually some cricket left to play. The third test begins on Thursday. What sort of reception do you think Australia is going to get from the Barmy Army? And how do you think England is going to respond on the field?
Well, the first part's easy. I mean, it'll be ferocious. We'll get called cheats, as we were probably the last time we went to Headingley. It is it's a very parochial cricket ground. It's a very difficult place to win. Australia hasn't won an Ashes series in England since 2001. So this is a momentous thing that Pat Cummins and his team are trying to do in England this summer. But of course, they're 2-0 up in a 5-test series. It's an enormous advantage. The pressure's really on England to turn around rather than on Australia to worry about whatever's coming from over the fence.
Chip, Legrand, thank you so much for joining. Please explain.
No worries.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Chi Wong. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Chris Payne. This is Please Explain. Thank you for listening.